You talk to my wife about sex toys?
Just listen. So, I didn't talk to her about them. I asked her to buy a bunch.
Okay.
And
it's even weirder.
Hey there, Laowinners, and welcome to another video. It's getting kind of chilly out here, isn't it?
You say that, but it's like 19 degrees.
Yeah, sweater weather, but it's a lot better than the 30.
Speak for yourself.
Degrees.
I'm sweating bullets.
So what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, I hope you guys enjoy this beautiful weather and this beautiful outdoor cafe that we've chosen.
Nice.
It's very, very nice here.
Yeah.
And it actually kind of reminds me of the topic that we're talking about today, which is sex.
But before we begin talking about that, we are going to put a little disclaimer before everyone jumps down our throats in the comments section.
Sure.
Because we're talking about this really vast topic, we're going to have to generalize. So if you're someone who's like, well, I'm Chinese and I don't blah, 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 we know, or if we say, oh, in the West, and someone says, well, I'm German, and we know, but we have to use generalizations here.
Chinese people, for the most part, generalize Westerners as sexually open people. Right?
Yeah, they kind of group all of us in one ball.
So American Hollywood movies represent all of Western nations, right?
Yes.
When in fact, Western nations' sexuality can vary a lot, especially in the hyper-religious American South, where it's kind of cool to be a virgin before marriage in the Bible Belt. They kind of share a lot of the same values as traditional Chinese people, actually. We're going to get into sexuality in China to dispel a lot of misconceptions because I've noticed in the West, a lot of people can't differentiate Asian nations very well. I've had
some people, I wouldn't say a lot.
I've had some people ask me how Tokyo was, okay? And I live in China. So anyway, a lot of stereotypes and negative stereotypes in particular come from Japan, and a lot of sexual deviations like used panty vending machines. Octopus porn. Not that I've seen that, but I'm sure it's there. Don't look that up. Anyway, a lot of these stereotypes come from Japan, and China is a very, very different society since it grew up on Confucian values. So we're going to break it down as historically, how was it sexually? How did it change throughout the Maoist revolution? And how is sexuality perceived today, right?
Yes.
You are the history buff of this duo.
Absolutely. I dip and dabble into history from time to time.
Why don't you introduce kind of sexuality in Chinese history and how the values kind of happen today?
Okay, so to give you kind of the Chinese lens to help you kind of understand their perspective on this topic, because it is very, very, very different, we have to go back a long time ago and talk about the roles that men and women played in society, which again were kind of very Confucian.
Sure. That's confusing.
You and your dad jokes lately are getting out of hand, like
Sorry.
Seriously.
Comes with age.
Women were generally speaking brought up to be womanly, to be gentle, to learn how to cook, to be kind to their husbands' brothers,
Nurturing.
to be kind, being very, very, very sweet. And before they were married, before they entered adulthood, they were kind of kept at home by their families. If families are hiding their women, how does that allow for any romantic interaction or any kind of courtship?
No, I think that's where the stereotype of no woman's equality in the past in Confucian society kind of came about, right?
Yeah, and that, again, I mean, a lot of people are on Chinese culture for being, because equality is a big thing nowadays in
the world,
in the world. And so it's not that men and women were not equal. The biggest right that women have in China, the biggest thing that they look forward to is getting married. And it's not that they didn't have any power in the house. Women ran the house, and they did it with sex.
Sure.
And that's how they kind of, not controlled their men, but it's how they were equal to men. So that kind of set the stage, or set the tone for Chinese sort of view on sexuality, and you can still see that today. And that's just kind of why it's very hush-hush. It's not something that people talk about.
So you mentioned the West. Obviously, it's been grossly different, right? We had a massive sexual revolution in the 1960s around that time. Yeah. And at least in America, in San Francisco, all the hippie movement and free sex, free love, all this kind of stuff kind of bloomed. And this is where free love and sex kind of led to sex education, and it being institutionalized as to how to have safe sex. This is how you have sex. Now sex is promoted or shown in movies. Now pornography is taking off like crazy. All of these things kind of came out of this movement, right? But China actually had its own sexual revolution as well. And it happened around the 1950s when Chairman Mao instituted these communist policies. And the famous quote is, "Women hold up half the sky," right? So all of a sudden, everyone's like, whoa, 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 wait. Thousands of years of like Confucianism and family values. And now I'm supposed to topsy-turvy this, and women have absolutely as much power as men, right?
Yeah.
Which meant that women were cutting their hair, they were getting jobs, they were working manual labor, they were joining military positions, all of these things that they were not supposed to do, taking male roles. Traditionally speaking, which led to a sexual revolution legally as well. So now concubines are illegal, right? So all these guys that have all these women living at home together with their wives and having sex with them, obviously, are now banned. So basically, China wanted to have a pure image under the government's shroud of morality, right? So you had a really, really, again, a hush-hush sexual culture, right? Women are now equal on paper, but now nobody can talk about sex for the moral reason or moral image of China, right?
Yeah, and again, yeah, and there is contrast there because, you know, in the West, I think we're kind of encouraged to date different people to see and pick and choose which person you want to spend the rest of your life with. And that's kind of our attitude. But because, like I said before, because Chinese people crave that romantic interaction between men and women, they expect the woman to be a virgin by the time they get married. Because if they're not, you instantly lose all of that romantic seclusion and discreet, you know.
Because that was such an important value.
Exactly. And so even today, men expect the women to be virgins before they get married.
Actually, a little funny insight on that. I shouldn't say funny, but up until 2003, it was there was a premarital physical exam that you could subject your wife to, right? And if she wasn't a virgin, you could, if you were already married, you could legally get divorced if she had lied about that, right? Or and there's also other legal ramifications if she wasn't a virgin. That was up until 2003, right?
Recent stuff.
So obviously very, very important. The purity of marriage keeps sex within the confines of marriage, right?
Yeah. Now, I read this study kind of a little while ago, and it mentioned, it was called the 7-year hump, or would you call it the 7-year hitch or something? Or itch? Yeah. Basically, if you're with someone or married to someone for 7 years, the chemicals that do the love, I guess, kind of, I don't know, my vocabulary isn't good enough to, that kind of dissipates after 7 years, and scientists figured out, or researchers figured out, or they came to the conclusion that the only way to fix that was sex, or trying new things in bed, I guess. And so that makes sense to Westerners because sex is a pretty important thing to our relationships. But how about China? Because they kind of have a 7-year hump or 7-year itch theory as well, but it works really differently.
Yeah, well, obviously people are going to wonder, why doesn't China's sexuality or you know, views on sexuality, why don't they match up with the West? And that's actually down to the very simple principle that love is defined differently as well. Yeah. Now, actually, this is anecdotal, but my mother-in-law told Vivi that when you get married, 7 years into it, you're going to fall out of love, and that stays forever.
Just like 7 years.
So,
it's January 1st.
Yeah, it's time to fall out of love. Anyway, she told her that you need to have kids before then because you stop having sex up until that point, right? Or after that point.
Yeah.
So after that 7 years, you don't love each other anymore, and you just become kind of partners. You kind of like work together to keep the household up and raise the kids, right?
Yeah, because if you get divorced, it's a way bigger deal here. There's a lot more at stake.
And you can see a lot of the older Confucian things that I thought, you know, we could say have died in recent China, actually kind of come back because although we don't label them concubines, rich or powerful men here in China very commonly will get mistresses that they pay for. All their friends know about them.
Yeah.
They're symbols of wealth and
Xiaosans.
status. Yeah, exactly. All these Chinese people behind us, they're like,
whoops.
Oh, talking about mistresses in your cafe. Anyway, so they still exist, and you can see little bits and you can see little signs of these old Confucian ideals coming back, right? Because love is dead, and the man has to be fulfilled through concubines as well. You see this in prostitution, which is rampant all over China, massage parlors as well. A common activity that my Chinese friends always wanted to do is go out and drink and then go pay for sex. And I always had to say, sorry, I gotta go home now, because I would never be comfortable doing that. But a lot of my Chinese friends saw that as a normal thing to do as a married man being in a relationship for so long, right?
Yeah.
So again, love, having this idea that you can't keep the love going, it just dies at a certain point and you have to take advantage of that moment to have the children. And after that, the man can kind of do what he wants and the woman stays at home and takes care of the children, completely goes in line with what you originally said women and male roles were, despite the laws saying that they're equal, right?
Yeah. I think what people really want to know is now, the younger generation now, what is their view on it? How do people behave?
Well, my wife's generation is the same as mine, obviously. And when I was growing up, I'd say that the average age that the people in my school would lose their virginity was between 16 and 18. I don't know about you. You're a little younger than me, but almost the same.
I'd say so.
Same thing, right? And it wasn't like, oh, I lost so much face because I'm still a virgin, but most people were pushing at that age to kind of, sexually experiment,
explore,
or at least make out with girls and talk about it. Be like, dude, she's so hot, I made out with her behind the bleachers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas Vivi's generation, she actually said that she wasn't sexually aware as to what parts she had. Literally what parts she had until she was 18 years old, right? She thought boys and girls were pretty much the same. And she had no idea how that worked because of lack of sex education and no sex in the media, right?
Yeah, it's just not something you talk about. You don't sit with your parents and talk about the birds. I didn't even talk with my parents about that. That was weird.
No, and the funny thing is she told me that the boys who are interested in sex, obviously, because hormones at that age, right, are going much faster than women.
Not even culture can control that.
No, they would get, bootleg VHS tapes and DVDs of Japanese porn and get all of their knowledge from that because they can't ask their parents, they can't ask their teachers, they can't actually buy normal pornography. They had to go out and find these weird bootleg tapes and learn everything about sex from that, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of led to this bizarre suppression of sex until they go to university and they're like, wait a minute, I think we're supposed to have sex and figure this out before we're married. So around if you're born in the 1980s in China, I think that generation was pretty normal to have sex before marriage, but you're way later on. You're in your mid-20s, like right before you get married. Maybe you have sex with one boyfriend before you get married.
Now here's where we can get a little bit specific with regions.
Sure.
There's a huge line between how people that live in big cities or grew up in big cities view sexuality and how people who grew up in kind of small towns or villages view sexuality. So how about big city people? We're talking like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing. How do they have sex?
Okay. How do they bone? Well, to be honest,
do the dirty.
It comes down to the march of progress. Capitalism in big cities, globalization, all of these things have led to young people chasing their dreams, getting married much later, right? Having more casual relationships because that's the way urban life works in a capitalist society.
Doing different stuff,
Yeah, and you are going to follow your parents' wishes much less, like arranged marriages and things like that, and find someone and experiment until you find someone that you really get along with, right?
Yeah.
Now, not only does region separate the kind of different ideals in sexuality, but also age. So we talked about the generation that I'm familiar with, which is Vivi's generation, already wildly different than my perspective of sexuality growing up. But the younger generation, I'm talking post-90s and post-2000s generation, are having premarital sex way more than ever in Chinese history, to the point where it's pretty normal for middle schoolers and high schoolers to be having sex in bigger cities, right? So I talked to a lot of people in the filming process of this who kind of agreed to be interviewed, but in the end said, hey, can you not use my video? But I did get a lot of good information in the process. And although they were still kind of shy and embarrassed to talk about it, they said not only themselves, some of them, but a lot of their classmates in middle school and high school had premarital sex. And it's very, very normal. So much so that the STD rate and teen pregnancy rate in China is way higher than it ever has been in the past.
So just to kind of conclude this with one general question. Are Chinese people more sexual than Western people?
I mean, that's so hard to define, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone enjoys sex just as much as the other person, right?
Yeah.
But I still think that talking about sex openly until, number one, the law changes, number two, the education system changes, and number three, people's attitude change about sexuality in general, it's always going to be a lot more secluded and kind of suppressed than in the West, for sure.
Okay, so what do you think, if you were to make a prediction as to how that attitude is going to go, what would you say?
I think that when the older generation kind of gets sent to the grandparents' roles and have less of a kind of say in the children's lives, and the younger people kind of have a more, individualistic lifestyle, I think until that happens, it's going to stay the same. But right now, as for the post-90s and post-2000s kids, if they continue at this trajectory, I think it will catch up to the West quite quickly.
Okay. I mean, from what I've seen in my years here, Chinese culture is incredibly strong, and it's very slow changing because grandparents, generally speaking, raise the children, so the children are getting the values from 2 generations ago. So I think it will change, just really slowly, because, you know, a lot of the young people I talk to really do value the values that they've received from their grandparents and parents. So yeah, I guess I think it'll change to be a little bit more open, but not for a very long time.
But don't take it from us. We actually went out and we interviewed a bunch of people, but unfortunately only one of them agreed to let us use their video.
Yeah, awkwardly enough.
老一代的人的话，他对性爱这方面肯定是持有很传统保守的一个思想观念的，他们从来没有改变过。他觉得，就像我们年轻这一代，在结婚之前就不能有这个性生活。我们年轻人却不这么认为，我们年轻人觉得现在性爱已经非常普遍了，我们不应该就那么保守，一定要等到结了婚才性爱吧。现在肯定在小学、初中、高中有一些性爱生活是非常普遍的，我认为是非常普遍的。其实性爱教育这方面、性生活教育这方面，很多学校的话都会有这方面一个培训跟课程。可是呢，为什么没有很广泛？因为我们中国人还是会处在一些比较害羞，还有不愿意去学这方面的东西。所以说，我认为以后会有更多，因为我们要预防这个艾滋病，还有一些教他们怎么去做会更安全。我觉得在未来的中国，这方面会更加的广泛。
Now, another thing that I have to say is that China, although it kind of bans pornography and anything sexually explicit in media, one thing that is absolutely booming, and this is what I've read, is that China is now the biggest manufacturer of sex toys and sexual aids.
Yeah.
And number 2, one of the biggest per capita consumers by internet, right? Because of this secluded kind of hidden nature, suppressed nature, they like the anonymity of being able to send all these sex toys home, right? So not only are these little curtain sex shops kind of opening up everywhere, but also Taobao, which is the biggest Chinese eBay basically, is a massive supplier for some of the weirdest stuff I have ever seen in my life. Seriously.
That's funny you should mention that. Kind of reminds me of a little idea I had cooking for a little while.
Don't tell me you got another challenge.
I may have had one stewing on the pot for a little while.
Fair enough.
So I have a challenge idea for you, and here's how it's going to work. I've talked to Vivi, and I've asked her to visit Taobao and order a bunch of different Chinese sex toys.
You talked to my wife about sex toys?
Just listen. So I didn't talk to her about them. I asked her to buy a bunch.
Okay.
And
it's even weirder.
What's going to happen is you're going to have a partner on your team for this game we're going to play. I'm going to have a partner on my team for a game we're going to play.
Both female.
Yes. We're going to take turns. One person on your team is going to be blindfolded, and they have to kind of
feel the toy. And you, if you're not blindfolded, have to describe the toy as best you can. So basically we're going to be playing Taboo with blindfolds and sex toys. This sounds pretty saucy. Pretty much. Why are we still doing this? I don't know. Anyways, that's our video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any predictions as to how the sexual attitude of China is going to go, put them in the comment section, or if you have any questions, put those in the comment section. If you like the video, hit the like button, and maybe subscribe. Just subscribe. Just do it. Yeah, and share the video for God's sakes. Jesus. Come on. Murph, that's an Irish name. That's Canadians say it sometimes. Okay. Anyways, again, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.